My name is Inez, and at 68 years old, I finally sold my tech company for $23 million after 3.5 decades of pouring my heart and soul into it. The retirement party at the Grand Plaza Hotel was everything I could have dreamed of, with colleagues, friends, and family gathered to celebrate. That is until I noticed my daughter-in-law Cynthia acting strangely near the champagne table. My blood ran cold as I watched her slip something from a small vial into my glass when she thought no one was looking. Let me tell you what happened next. If you're watching this video, please let me know where you're tuning in from and hit subscribe to hear more true stories like mine. I never imagined I would become successful enough to retire with millions in the bank. Growing up in Millfield, Nebraska, I was just a farm girl with big dreams and a knack for computers when they were still the size of refrigerators. In 1988, I took a leap of faith and started my cybersecurity company with just $5,000 borrowed from my parents. They thought I was crazy to leave my stable job at IBM, but something inside me knew this was my path. The early years were brutal. As one of the few women in tech security during that era, I faced constant skepticism. Clients would look past me to speak to my male employees. Investors would ask when my husband would join meetings. I didn't have a husband, just an unshakable belief in my vision for the company. The turning point came in 1995 when we landed our first Fortune 500 client after their systems were compromised. Our solution saved them millions, and word spread quickly. We survived the dot-com crash when many competitors folded, partly because I always ran a lean operation and never spent what we didn't have. By the time the acquisition offer came last year, SecureNext had grown to 300 employees with offices in 4 countries. $23 million was more money than I had ever dreamed of seeing in my lifetime. The decision to sell wasn't easy, but at 68, I was ready for the next chapter. My son Jackson had been my greatest supporter through it all. He followed in my footsteps, becoming a brilliant software engineer, though he chose to work for other companies rather than joining mine. I respected his independence. When he met Cynthia at a tech conference 6 years ago, he was immediately smitten. They married after just 6 months of dating. From the beginning, something about Cynthia made me uneasy. She was strikingly beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. In public, she was charming and vivacious, but in private moments, I caught glimpses of a coldness that unsettled me. Before Cynthia, Jackson and I had dinner together every Sunday. We would spend hours discussing new technologies, solving puzzles, or just enjoying each other's company. After the wedding, those dinners became monthly, then quarterly, and eventually rare special occasions. Each time I suggested getting together, Cynthia would have some reason why it wasn't convenient. There were other red flags I tried to ignore. During her first visit to my home, I noticed her cataloging my possessions, with her eyes lingering on art pieces and asking pointed questions about their value. Once my diamond tennis bracelet disappeared during a family gathering, only to reappear in my jewelry box days later after I mentioned calling the police. Cynthia was the one who found it, claiming it must have fallen behind the dresser. When I announced my retirement, Cynthia immediately insisted on planning the party. She brushed aside my preference for a small gathering at my home and instead booked the most exclusive ballroom at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The guest list expanded from 50 close friends and colleagues to over 200 people, many of whom I barely knew but were connected to Cynthia's social circle. I was uncomfortable with the excessive display, but Jackson seemed so pleased by his wife's enthusiasm that I didn't object. What bothered me more was overhearing Cynthia on the phone describing it as her event and how it would establish their position in the business community now that they would be managing significant assets. What Cynthia didn't know was that I had built my success on paying attention to details others missed. That skill had protected my clients from cyber threats for decades, and now it was warning me about a threat much closer to home. 2 weeks before the party, I received an unexpected visit from Cynthia's mother, Margaret. She was recently widowed, and this was only our 3rd meeting since the wedding. Margaret shared her daughter's polished appearance and calculated charm. Over tea, she asked probing questions about my retirement plans. How would I manage such a large sum? Had I updated my will recently? Was Jackson named as the executor? Did I plan to buy any additional properties? Each question seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. When Margaret suggested I might find managing my finances too complex at my age and that Jackson and Cynthia would be happy to help, alarm bells rang loudly in my mind. I deflected her questions with vague responses and changed the subject, but the seed of suspicion had taken root. That afternoon, I called my attorney and scheduled an appointment to review my estate planning, not to make the changes Margaret was fishing for, but to protect myself from whatever might be coming. The night of the retirement party arrived with perfect early summer weather. The Grand Plaza's ballroom had floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city I had built my business in. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elegant floral arrangements in blue and silver, the colors of my company logo. As guests arrived, I greeted them in a simple but elegant navy blue dress that Cynthia had frowned at when I showed her. She had suggested something more ostentatious, arguing that this was my moment to shine. What she didn't understand was that I had never needed to shine. I had always preferred to be underestimated, then quietly excel. Many of my employees, past and present, came to celebrate with me. Thomas, my first hire, who was now nearing retirement himself, embraced me with tears in his eyes. Maria, a brilliant programmer I had mentored, who went on to start her own successful company, flew in from California. Their genuine affection warmed my heart amid my growing unease. Jackson arrived looking handsome in his tailored suit, giving me a bear hug that momentarily pushed away my concerns. For a second, he was my little boy again, the one who used to sit beside me with his toy computer pretending to help as I worked late into the night. Cynthia made her entrance shortly after, in a striking red dress that immediately drew all eyes in the room. She rushed to my side, embracing me effusively and loudly proclaiming how proud she was of her mother-in-law. The performance was flawless, yet I could feel the hollowness behind her words. Throughout the evening, Cynthia made a point of telling guests how she had personally selected each detail of the party, from the specific shade of blue in the flowers to the vintage champagne. In reality, my assistant had arranged most elements according to my preferences with Cynthia, changing only what would be most visible and impressive. I circulated among my guests, treasuring conversations with people who had been part of my journey. Several former employees shared stories of moments when my guidance had impacted their careers. One woman thanked me for standing firm when a client had harassed her, saying it had shown her what true leadership looked like. These were the rewards that meant far more to me than the millions in my bank account. About an hour into the event, I found myself cornered by Margaret again. She wore an outfit nearly identical in style to her daughters, though in black rather than red. They looked like different generations of the same predator. Margaret sipped her wine slowly as she commented on the impressive crowd. As usual, she quickly steered the conversation toward money. Did I plan to maintain my current lifestyle? Had I considered the benefits of setting up a family trust rather than direct inheritance? Jackson was such a responsible young man, she observed surely he would manage the inheritance well. I answered non-committally, mentioning that I had excellent financial advisors handling those matters. Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she realized she would get no useful information from me. As I excused myself from Margaret's company, I overheard a fragment of conversation between Cynthia and a man I didn't recognize. They stood partially concealed behind a decorative column, speaking in hushed tones. "After tonight, things will move quickly," the man said. "When it's all taken care of, we can discuss next steps," Cynthia replied. "You'll have everything you need by Monday." They abruptly changed topics when they noticed me approaching, with Cynthia brightly introducing the man as an old friend from college. He nodded politely and quickly found a reason to move away. Cynthia's eyes followed me with a calculation that sent a chill through me. Something was definitely wrong. The event coordinator announced that we would begin the formal program in 30 minutes, starting with toasts before dinner. Servers began arranging champagne flutes on trays near the bar. Cynthia immediately volunteered to help, insisting she wanted each glass to contain the exact same amount for the perfect photo opportunity. I watched from across the room as she directed the servers with unnecessary precision about which trays would go to which tables. Her eyes kept darting to the head table, where I would be seated alongside Jackson, my sister Patricia, and a few other family members, including Cynthia herself and Margaret. A growing sense of foreboding filled me as I observed Cynthia's unusual interest in the champagne service. Something in her demeanor reminded me of predators I had seen in nature documentaries just before they pounce on unsuspecting prey. I needed a moment alone to collect my thoughts, so I excused myself and headed to the restroom. After splashing cool water on my face, I stood looking at my reflection. The woman in the mirror had lines of experience around her eyes and silver threading through her dark hair, but her gaze was still sharp and clear. I had spent decades identifying threats before they materialized. My instincts were rarely wrong. Instead of returning through the main entrance, I slipped back into the ballroom through a side door near the service area. This gave me a clear view of the drink table without being immediately visible to others. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. Cynthia stood at the table where servers had arranged rows of champagne flutes. She glanced around carefully, checking that all attention was focused on the slideshow of company memories that had just begun playing on the large screens. Then, with practiced efficiency, she opened her small clutch purse and removed what appeared to be a tiny glass vial. She unscrewed the cap, holding the vial low beside one specific champagne glass. With a quick movement, she emptied the contents into the glass and gave it a subtle swirl to mix the liquid. Most disturbing was what she did next. She used her finger to leave a nearly invisible smudge on the base of the glass, marking it. Then she carefully positioned that glass on a specific tray and whispered something to the server about which table it was for. My heart pounded as I processed what I had just witnessed. The casual questions about my heart medication during her last visit, her intense interest in which medications might interact badly with alcohol, the convenient way she had positioned herself to control the champagne distribution. This wasn't paranoia. My daughter-in-law had just poisoned a drink intended for me. I forced myself to breathe slowly as I considered my options. I could create a scene immediately, but without proof it would be my word against hers. Cynthia would undoubtedly paint me as a confused old woman making wild accusations. I needed to be strategic, just as I had been in business all these years. I watched as Cynthia returned to the main party, a picture of innocence as she laughed with guests. She made her way to Margaret, and they had a brief, intense conversation in the corner. Margaret's expression shifted from concern to satisfaction. They were clearly in this together, whatever this was. The server carried the tray with my marked glass toward the head table. I observed as Cynthia intercepted him, pointing specifically to ensure the marked glass would be placed at my seat. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I thought of the strange conversation I had overheard. After tonight, things will move quickly, when it's all taken care of. The implications were chilling. This wasn't just about making me ill. This was potentially lethal. My mind raced through possibilities. If I suddenly became severely ill or died at my own retirement party, Jackson would inherit everything. With Cynthia controlling Jackson, she would effectively gain access to my entire fortune. The recent questions about my will and estate planning took on an ominous new meaning. I needed to act. I could switch glasses with someone, but who? It had to be someone connected to this plot. The obvious choice was Cynthia herself, but she might be watching too carefully for that. Her mother, however, might not be as vigilant, assuming her daughter had everything under control. I watched as all the champagne glasses were distributed around the tables. The marked glass was placed at my seat as expected. Margaret's glass was positioned 3 seats away on the same side of the table. I needed a distraction to make my move. Fortunately, the event coordinator chose that moment to test the microphone with a loud screech of feedback. As everyone winced and turned toward the stage, I quickly moved along our table, switching my glass with Margaret's. The entire maneuver took less than 3 seconds. As I calmly took my seat, I noticed Cynthia watching me intently from across the room. Had she seen no, she was smiling, apparently satisfied that everything was proceeding according to plan. Margaret took her seat beside me, completely unaware that she now held the glass intended for me. My hands trembled slightly beneath the table, but my face remained composed. Decades of high-stakes business negotiations had taught me to never reveal my thoughts before I was ready. Tonight, that skill might save my life. Jackson approached the microphone, ready to begin his toast. Cynthia hurried to her seat beside him, shooting me a glance that might have appeared loving to others, but contained an anticipation that turned my stomach. As everyone raised their glasses, I made direct eye contact with her, holding the untainted champagne in my hand. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her perfect features. My son stood before the gathering, handsome and earnest in the spotlight. Despite my racing thoughts, my heart swelled with maternal pride. Jackson had grown into a good man, despite his questionable choice in a wife. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackson began, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight to honor an extraordinary woman. My mother built SecureNex from nothing into an industry leader through sheer brilliance, determination, and integrity." As he spoke about my journey from farm girl to tech CEO, I maintained my composure while keeping a careful eye on Margaret. She was listening to Jackson's speech with a practiced smile, occasionally glancing at her watch as if impatient for something to happen. "When I was 10 years old," Jackson continued, "I remember coming into her home office late one night and finding her still working. Instead of sending me back to bed, she pulled up a chair and explained the security program she was debugging. That was Mom always making time for what mattered most, even in her busiest moments." Cynthia stood beside him, her hand on his arm, nodding with theatrical emotion. Her eyes kept darting between me and my untouched champagne glass, a slight furrow appearing between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. As Jackson finished his heartfelt tribute, the room raised their glasses. I brought mine to my lips, but only pretended to sip my eyes, never leaving Margaret, as she drank deeply from her glass, the glass containing whatever substance Cynthia had added. To my mother, Jackson concluded, "May her retirement be as successful and fulfilling as her career." The crowd echoed the sentiment, and everyone drank. I carefully kept my glass close to my lips without actually consuming any champagne. Cynthia's eyes narrowed slightly in confusion as she watched me, clearly expecting some immediate reaction. For several minutes, nothing seemed amiss. Conversations resumed around the tables as servers began bringing out the first course. I engaged pleasantly with Patricia on my right, all while maintaining awareness of Margaret on my left. She had emptied her glass completely and was now laughing too loudly at something another guest had said. Then I noticed the first signs. Margaret's speech became slightly slurred mid-sentence. She reached for her water glass and missed knocking it sideways. As she apologized, her words ran together unnaturally. "Something wrong, Margaret?" I asked with deliberate concern. "Just feeling a bit—" She struggled to find the word dizzy. Must be the excitement. Within minutes, her condition deteriorated rapidly. Her pupils dilated visibly, and her coordination failed completely as she attempted to stand. She collapsed back into her chair, then began sliding toward the floor. "Someone help!" I called out, catching her before she hit the ground. "She needs medical attention." The room erupted in concerned chaos. Jackson rushed over while Cynthia stood frozen, her face a mask of horror as she stared at her mother instead of at me. That single reaction confirmed everything. She had expected me to be the one collapsing, not Margaret. A doctor attending the party pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Margaret, who was now barely conscious. Her breathing had become labored, and her pulse was rapid but weak when I checked it. "Has she taken any medication today?" the doctor asked. "Not that I know of," I replied truthfully. She seemed fine until just after the toast. Cynthia finally snapped out of her shock and hurried over, playing the role of concerned daughter. Mom, what's happening?" Her performance was convincing to everyone except me. I caught the momentary flash of accusation in her eyes when she looked at me. She suspected I had somehow orchestrated this turn of events, but couldn't understand how. The paramedics arrived within minutes, efficiently transferring Margaret to a stretcher. Her vital signs were unstable. They reported consistent with some kind of sedative overdose, possibly combined with alcohol. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Cynthia dramatically insisted on accompanying her mother. "I'll go too," I said firmly, leaving no room for argument. "Jackson, can you make our apologies to the guests and join us at the hospital?" Jackson nodded, clearly distressed, but handling the situation with the calm rationality I had always admired in him. Cynthia shot me another venomous glance before composing her features into a mask of filial concern for the benefit of the paramedics. In the ambulance, I observed silently as Cynthia held her mother's hand, whispering urgently in her ear when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I caught fragments. "What did you take? Should have told me stick to the plan." At the hospital, doctors immediately took blood samples and began treatment for what they suspected was a benzodiazepine overdose combined with alcohol. While Margaret was being treated, we gathered in the waiting room. Jackson arrived shortly after bringing coffee for everyone. The attending physician approached us an hour later with a serious expression. Mrs. Wells is stabilized, but she experienced a dangerous reaction to a potent sedative mixed with alcohol. Her toxicology screen showed a concerning level of Rohypnol in her system. Rohypnol. Jackson looked shocked. Isn't that a date rape drug? Yes, the doctor confirmed. In combination with alcohol, it can cause respiratory depression and even death in sufficient quantities, especially in older adults. Do you know how she might have ingested this substance? Absolutely not. Cynthia interjected before anyone else could speak. My mother doesn't take any medications besides her blood pressure pills. Could someone have put something in her drink? The irony of her question might have been amusing under different circumstances. I simply said, "That seems like the most likely explanation. The champagne at the party would have masked any taste." The doctor nodded gravely. "We've notified the police as this appears to be a case of intentional drugging. They'll want to speak with everyone who was at the event." Cynthia's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her purse strap. The vial, I realized, was probably still inside. Would she try to dispose of it here at the hospital? "Why don't you go sit with your mother for a while?" I suggested to Cynthia. "I'm sure she'd find it comforting to see you when she wakes up." She hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave me alone with Jackson, but unable to find a reasonable excuse to refuse. Once she had disappeared down the hallway, I turned to my son. "Jackson, I need to speak with you privately about something very serious, but not here. Let's step outside for a moment." I led Jackson to a quiet garden area on the hospital grounds away from prying ears. The evening air was cool against my skin as I considered how to tell my only child that his wife had just tried to murder me. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his face etched with worry. "This is supposed to be your celebration night, and instead we're at a hospital. Did you know Margaret had a drug problem?" I took a deep breath. "Jackson, there's no easy way to say this. What happened tonight wasn't an accident. I saw Cynthia put something in a champagne glass that was meant for me. I switched my glass with Margaret's when no one was looking." His face went blank with shock, then flushed with anger. "What are you saying? That's a terrible accusation. Cynthia would never— Why would you even think something like that?" I had anticipated this reaction. Despite his intelligence, Jackson had always been trusting to a fault, seeing the best in everyone. It was one of the qualities I loved most about him, but it had also made him vulnerable to someone like Cynthia. "I understand this is hard to hear," I said gently, "but I saw it with my own eyes. She marked the glass so she could be sure it was placed at my seat. I've suspected for some time that she married you for financial reasons, but I never imagined she would go this far." "This is insane, Mom," he protested, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "You've never liked Cynthia, but this is beyond— She helped organize your entire retirement party. Why would she try to hurt you at an event she planned? Because tonight, everyone who matters in my life was present," I explained. "If I had a medical emergency surrounded by witnesses, including medical professionals, who could attest that I received immediate care, no one would suspect foul play. It would look like a tragic accident, possibly attributed to the excitement or stress of the event. With me gone, you inherit everything. And with your trusting nature, Cynthia would effectively control those assets." Jackson paced back and forth, shaking his head in denial. I could see him struggling to reconcile his image of his wife with what I was telling him. "You need proof for something like this, Mom. Real proof." "I have it," I said quietly. "Last week I had security cameras installed throughout the venue. My security team was monitoring remotely. The footage of Cynthia tampering with the drink has already been secured and sent to my attorney." His steps faltered. "Why would you have cameras installed?" "Because over the past year I've documented a pattern of concerning behavior. The missing jewelry that mysteriously reappeared, the sudden interest in my heart medication, the deliberate isolation tactics to separate you from me, the constant questions about my will and estate planning. Tonight was just the culmination." Jackson sank onto a nearby bench, his face ashen. "I don't know what to believe." I sat beside him, taking his hand. "I know this hurts and I'm so sorry, but right now, we need to be careful. The police will be investigating, and Cynthia still has the vial in her purse. We should return inside before she gets suspicious." As we walked back toward the hospital entrance, Jackson stopped suddenly. "If what you're saying is true, was Margaret in on it?" "Her own mother." I nodded grimly. "From what I've observed and overheard, they planned this together. Remember how intensely Margaret questioned me about my finances when she visited, how she suggested you should manage my assets?" "Oh, God," he whispered, the full implications beginning to sink in. "What do we do now?" "First, we act normal until the police arrive," I said firmly. "Don't confront Cynthia yet. Let her believe I don't suspect anything. Then we let justice take its course." When we returned to the waiting room, Cynthia was already there, pacing nervously. "The doctor says Mom is awake but confused," she announced. "They're keeping her overnight for observation. I noticed she had a different purse now, a small hospital gift shop bag, instead of the clutch she had carried at the party. She had disposed of the evidence, but she didn't know about the security footage." "That's good news," I said with practiced sincerity. "I'm sure she'll make a full recovery." 2 police officers appeared at the entrance to the waiting room, accompanied by a hospital administrator who pointed in our direction. Cynthia's face paled visibly. "Mrs. Harrington," one officer addressed me. "I'm Detective Morrison. We'd like to ask you some questions about the incident at your party tonight." "Of course," I replied calmly. "I'd be happy to help in any way I can." As I walked toward the officers, I glanced back at Cynthia. The mask of perfect composure had slipped, revealing a glimpse of the calculating woman beneath. She was already formulating her next move, unaware that I had outmaneuvered her hours ago. After giving my statement to the police, including information about the security footage my team had preserved, I found a moment to speak with Cynthia alone in the hospital corridor. She was leaning against the wall, texting furiously on her phone when I approached. "Difficult night," I said conversationally. She quickly locked her phone screen and forced a concerned expression. "Yes, it's been awful. I can't imagine who would want to hurt my mother." I looked directly into her eyes. "That's the strange thing, isn't it? I don't think anyone wanted to hurt Margaret. I think someone wanted to hurt me, and somehow the glasses got switched." Her eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "What are you suggesting? That someone tried to poison you at your own retirement party?" "That's paranoid, Inez." "Is it?" I asked mildly. The security cameras I had installed throughout the venue might suggest otherwise. The color drained from her perfect complexion. Security cameras. Of course, I continued pleasantly. After decades in cybersecurity, taking precautions is second nature to me. The footage has already been reviewed and secured with my attorney. It shows everything, Cynthia. Everything. Her composure cracked entirely. "You switched the glasses," she hissed, her beautiful face contorting with rage. "You saw me and you switched them. You poisoned my mother." "Technically, you poisoned your mother," I corrected her. "I merely ensured the drink reached a different recipient than intended. The recipient who helped plan this little scheme, I imagine." She glanced around frantically, ensuring we were alone in the corridor. "You can't prove anything. It would be your word against mine, and Jackson trusts me completely. The footage proves everything I said calmly. The vial, the marking of the glass, your directions to the server. Even if you've disposed of the vial, the police can still test the residue in Margaret's glass. And I suspect your mother might be willing to share some interesting information to save herself." "That bitch doesn't know anything," Cynthia snapped, then immediately realized her mistake. I smiled sadly. "Thank you for confirming my suspicions. For what it's worth, I always hoped I was wrong about you for Jackson's sake." Her desperation was palpable now. "Listen, we can work something out," she pleaded, her tone shifting to conciliatory. "It was just a sedative, not enough to cause real harm. I only wanted to make you look incompetent, so Jackson would take over managing your assets. You're getting older, and decisions that large shouldn't be left to someone who might be declining." The calculated insult almost made me laugh. Instead, I raised an eyebrow. "A sedative that combined with alcohol could cause respiratory failure in a woman my age. That seems rather convenient. It was Margaret's idea," she blurted out, throwing her mother under the bus without hesitation. "She pushed me into it, said we needed to act before you changed your will. I never wanted to hurt you." "Yet here we are," I observed. "And now your mother is the one in the hospital bed with police investigating how she ingested a controlled substance. Actions have consequences, Cynthia." Her tactics changed again, this time to threats. "If you pursue this, it will destroy Jackson. Do you really want him to know his wife was trying to harm his mother? The scandal will follow him forever. Your company's reputation will be tarnished. Everyone will be talking about how the great Inez Harrington's son married a gold digger who tried to kill her." I considered her words carefully. Jackson will be hurt, that's true, but he's stronger than you give him credit for. As for scandals, I survived sexism, corporate espionage, and 2 market crashes. I think my reputation can withstand 1 attempted murder by an avaricious daughter-in-law. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice a desperate whisper. "Justice," I said simply, "and for my son to be free of your manipulation. The rest is up to the authorities." I walked away as she called after me, alternating between threats and pleas. I found Jackson sitting alone in the waiting room, his expression haunted. He looked up as I approached. "The police want to review the security footage," he said quietly. "They asked me if I knew you had cameras installed. I had to tell them I didn't." I sat beside him, giving him space to process everything. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. They also want to search our house," he continued, "and they've stationed an officer outside Margaret's room. Mom, tell me honestly, is there any chance you're wrong about this? Any chance at all?" The hope in his voice broke my heart. "I want to be wrong, Jackson, more than anything, but I'm not." He nodded slowly, acceptance gradually replacing denial in his eyes. "I should have seen it. There were signs, weren't there? The way she always steered conversations toward your finances, how she insisted we couldn't visit you because you were too busy when it was actually her making excuses, how my access to our joint accounts kept getting more restricted. Don't blame yourself," I said firmly. "Cynthia is exceptionally good at deception. She targeted you precisely because you're trusting and good-hearted." "What happens now?" he asked, sounding suddenly very young. "Now we let the legal process unfold," I answered gently, "and we support each other through what comes next." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted down the hall. Running footsteps and urgent voices caught our attention. A moment later, Detective Morrison appeared in the waiting room doorway. "Mrs. Harrington." "Mr. Harrington, we have a situation," he said gravely. "Your daughter-in-law has fled the hospital. We have officers in pursuit, but I wanted to alert you immediately." Jackson's face crumpled as the last of his doubts evaporated. "Only the guilty run," he whispered. I took my son's hand, holding it firmly in mine, as the full weight of the truth settled over him. In that moment of painful clarity, I made a silent promise that we would get through this together, no matter what came next. The weeks following that fateful night unfolded like scenes from a crime drama rather than my anticipated peaceful retirement. Cynthia was apprehended at the Canadian border 2 days after fleeing the hospital, traveling on a fake passport with $30,000 in cash and several of my jewelry pieces that had gone missing over the years. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The security footage clearly showed her drugging the champagne. Toxicology confirmed the presence of Rohypnol, combined with a heart medication known to cause severe reactions in someone with my medical profile. Most damning of all, Margaret turned state's evidence against her daughter in exchange for a reduced sentence. It was Margaret's testimony that revealed the full scope of their plan. They had systematically researched methods that would appear to be natural causes or an unfortunate accident. Cynthia had been slowly increasing her influence over Jackson's financial decisions, positioning herself to control his inheritance after my death. They had even consulted with an attorney about how quickly they could access my assets once I was gone. The media attention was intense at first. Tech CEO targeted in murder plot by daughter-in-law screamed the headlines. Reporters camped outside my home hoping for statements or photographs. My company's stock took a temporary hit as investors processed the sensational story. I gave one brief press conference stating that I was cooperating with authorities and asking for privacy during a difficult family time. Jackson filed for divorce immediately, but the legal proceedings were complicated by Cynthia's criminal case. He moved back into my guest house temporarily, both for company and additional security. Those first few weeks, I often heard him pacing late into the night, struggling to reconcile the woman he had loved with the calculating criminal revealed in court documents. "Were you afraid?" he asked me one evening as we sat on the patio watching the sunset. That night at the party, when you realized what was happening, I considered the question carefully. Not afraid exactly. I was sad. Sad that someone who should have been family had brought such darkness into our lives, and determined not to let her succeed. How did you stay so calm? I would have panicked. When you've spent decades protecting data from the world's most sophisticated hackers, you develop a certain clarity in crisis, I explained. My entire career was built on anticipating threats and neutralizing them before they caused damage. I wish I had your instincts, he said ruefully. I never suspected a thing. She played me perfectly. We were designed by evolution to trust our tribe, I reminded him. It's what allowed humans to build civilizations. Your capacity for trust isn't a weakness, Jackson. It's one of your greatest strengths. Cynthia exploited it, but that doesn't diminish its value. As the criminal case progressed, I took steps to protect my assets and restructure my estate planning. My attorney helped me create a more sophisticated trust with multiple layers of oversight. While Jackson would still inherit the bulk of my wealth, eventually there would be independent trustees and ethical guidelines governing how the money could be used. I also established a foundation focused on preventing elder financial abuse and exploitation, committing $5 million of my retirement fund to the cause. If my story could help others recognize and avoid similar situations, some good might come from the ordeal. The business community rallied around us with surprising loyalty. Former competitors sent messages of support. Several of my longtime employees organized a proper retirement dinner, small and intimate, as I had originally wanted. Even with everything that had happened, their genuine affection reminded me that my legacy extended far beyond the money Cynthia had coveted. 6 months after the incident, Cynthia was convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. She received a 20-year sentence with possibility of parole after 12 years. Margaret, in exchange for her testimony, received 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. Jackson attended every day of the trial, sitting beside me with quiet dignity, despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. The day of the verdict, as we left the courthouse surrounded by reporters, he straightened his shoulders and faced the cameras. My mother built her success on integrity and brilliance, he told them clearly. No one can take that legacy from her, least of all someone who never understood that true wealth lies in the lives you touch, not the money you accumulate. His words, spoken with such conviction, despite his pain, filled me with immeasurable pride. In that moment, I knew we would both be okay. 1 year after my interrupted retirement party, I finally began to live the life I had envisioned for myself. My modernist home overlooking the lake became a sanctuary rather than a workplace. Mornings started with coffee on the deck instead of urgent emails. Afternoons might include volunteering lunch with friends or working in my newly established garden. Jackson had moved into his own place downtown, healing gradually from Cynthia's betrayal. Our Sunday dinners resumed now with a deeper appreciation for the simple pleasure of family without hidden agendas. He had started dating again recently, very cautiously, a kind-hearted librarian who shared his love of science fiction and hiking. The foundation I established had already helped dozens of seniors recover from financial exploitation and was developing educational programs to help others recognize warning signs before it was too late. I joined the board, but intentionally limited my involvement, determined not to fill my retirement with new obligations. Perhaps most surprisingly, at 69, I found myself in a new relationship. Richard was a retired judge I met at a charity function, a widower with a dry wit and kind eyes who asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. Our second date was a cooking class where we both failed spectacularly at making soufflés. Our shared laughter that evening felt like a corner being turned in my life. The hardest part of healing was learning to trust again. For months after the incident, I found myself analyzing every interaction for hidden motives. Was the friendly bank teller really interested in my weekend plans or fishing for information? Did my new neighbor actually need to borrow a ladder, or was he assessing my home security? My therapist called it a normal trauma response and helped me develop strategies to distinguish between reasonable caution and paranoia. Gradually, I found balance, maintaining healthy boundaries without isolating myself from genuine connections. Jackson struggled similarly, second-guessing his judgment in relationships. We supported each other through the process, sometimes finding humor in our shared suspicion. We established a code phrase, "Does this soup taste funny to you?" that we could use when either of us felt we were overthinking a harmless situation. The media eventually moved on to other sensational stories, though occasionally journalists still reached out for interviews or book possibilities. I declined them all. My story wasn't meant to be entertainment. If I shared it at all, it would be on my own terms, in service of helping others avoid similar situations. One unexpected outcome was the community that formed around us. Other families who had experienced exploitation or betrayal reached out first hesitantly, then with increasing openness. We shared resources, recommendations for trustworthy financial advisors and therapists, and the simple comfort of understanding without judgment. On the anniversary of that fateful night, I invited a small group of trusted friends to my home for the intimate retirement celebration I had originally wanted. We ate good food, shared memories, and raised glasses in a toast that carried no fear or hidden agendas. Later, as the gathering wound down, my sister Patricia pulled me aside. "You know what I find remarkable," she said. "After everything that happened, you're not bitter. Cautious, yes, but not hardened. That takes extraordinary strength." I considered her observation. The alternative would mean Cynthia took something even more valuable than money from me, my capacity for joy and connection. I refused to give her that power. What I've learned through all of this is that money doesn't change who people are, it simply reveals their true character more clearly. Cynthia was always calculating and self-serving. The wealth just raised the stakes. Similarly, genuine connections remain genuine regardless of financial circumstances. The experience taught me that intuition deserves respect. Those small moments of unease I felt around Cynthia from the beginning weren't paranoia. They were my subconscious recognizing patterns my conscious mind hadn't yet assembled. I now listen more carefully to that inner voice. I've also discovered that it's never too late for new beginnings. At almost 70, I'm embarking on adventures I never had time for during my career. Last month, Richard and I took sailing lessons. Next year, we're planning a trip to the Galapagos Islands. The future stretches before me with possibilities I couldn't have imagined during those dark days in the hospital. Most importantly, I've learned the true meaning of wealth. It isn't the millions in my bank account or the success of my company. It's the relationships built on mutual respect and genuine caring. It's the legacy of mentorship and ethical leadership I left in my industry. It's the quiet moments of connection with my son as we rebuild our family on a foundation of truth and resilience. If you're watching this, and something in my story resonates with your own experience, know that you're not alone. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't immediately identify why. Document concerning behaviors. Seek support from people who have no financial interest in your decisions. And remember that your worth extends far beyond any assets you possess. Have you ever experienced warning signs in a relationship that you initially dismissed? What helped you recognize them for what they were? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video. If you found it valuable, subscribe to hear more true stories of resilience and share with anyone who might benefit from these hard-won lessons. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find both security and genuine connection in your own journey.